In the 1880s, over the Lower East Side of Manhattan, over the tenements that housed the Irish of New York, the signature work of the age was rising, the Brooklyn Bridge. It was Irish labor that built it, Irishmen who died in the East River mud. But there was one Irish boy from the East Side streets who got to climb with his dad to the top of these towers, even before there was a road between them, when the bridge was just a narrow catwalk of wooden slats, swaying over river and city. He was scared to death, but he would never forget it. He could see the great city whole, even if he couldn't feel its future coming at him. A time when the Irish would rise to run New York, to rule it, from the sewers to the skyline. That boy on the bridge was Alfred E. Smith, and his story is the story of the Irish in New York. He would stand at the peak of their achievement, and from the high position he'd attain, he would try to cross an even larger divide, try to build a bridge between his people and the new country they chose. That would be his most fearful crossing. But his story starts here, at the base of this tower, where the bridge made the streets of his youth into chasms of perpetual shade.
Al Smith's entire boyhood was spent in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge. His family had come and got off there because that's where the ship docked, and they went to the first place they could get an apartment, and that's where he grew up. It was a wilderness of tenements stretching away from the Brooklyn Bridge. It was the old neighborhood. It was the Fourth Ward. It was the very heartland of the Irish in New York and of the Tammany Hall machine.
It was, with the exception of parts of Beijing and Calcutta, the most crowded square mile on the face of the earth.
You had stables, slaughterhouses, tanneries, fat and bone boiling factories that were very close to the tenements. And the tenements were places where disease was rampant.
My grandfather Tom told us many people would go to the slaughterhouse and they would buy the hot blood for a penny, and they would drink the hot blood of the freshly killed cows because it was believed that was a cure for TB, or consumption as they called it at that time. And both my grandfather Tom and my grandmother Agnes Ward lost sisters to TB.
It's noisy, it's filthy, but it's also a place where Irish kids are seeing people of different ethnic groups, they're hearing different languages for the first time. It's a place where the whole drama of human life is being enacted on the street.
It was the biggest, rudest, and meanest village, with its closeness, joys, and suspicions writ large too. The land of opportunity it was, but hard-hearted. There were jobs, but body-breaking jobs. There was nothing to stop the Irish from climbing, and nothing to catch them if they fell. On every block, any year, there were births, christenings, weddings, and families sunk by injuries, drink, fights, or fire. Fire was the dread of those tenements.
They were absolute fire traps. Many women did garment work of various kinds in their apartments, and so you had piles of fabric and feathers and all kinds of things that could catch fire very easily.
You had to get out as quickly as possible because it spread so quickly. The horses would bolt out of the station, and the Dalmatians would nip at the horses' hooves to keep them running. But for little boys, the fire engines were the most exciting thing in the world.
Now, at that time, the great sailing ships would come in. They'd all pull up to the pier so that their bowsprits would extend over the street. And the Irish kids would hang from the rigging of the bowsprits right over the street. And Al Smith used to do that.
He'd be watching the sailors come off the ships with their goods brought from all over the world. He was most interested in the fact that they'd bring these animals from all sorts of ports. And at one time, he ended up with 4 dogs, 2 parakeets, a monkey, and a goat on South Street. And initially, they were kept in the attic until his mother said to him, "You've got to find another place."
Al's father taught him how to swim. He tied a rope around the boy's waist and threw him into the East River. That's how you learn. No squawking and no bathing suit. They wouldn't want it said they were putting on airs. Al's dad was known on those New York docks.
My grandfather's father was a very large man, well over 6 feet tall. He was a trucker, and he worked 6 days a week, well into the nights. And then he'd have to be up at 3 or 4 in the morning. The one exception to his workday week would be Sundays. That was set aside exclusively to be with his family.
Even the day of rest started early. In fact, with a Saturday night bath. Then in the morning, you'd button on a clean collar for your glad rags, just in time for Mass. Sunday dinner was the one meal when all sat down together and welcomed friends. Nothing spoke better of a man and his work than a fine roast that could stretch for 2 or 3 more. Al's father was proud to provide. After dinner, Al and his father were out the door. Sunday with the family had to include Foley's.
You'd have to imagine Tom Foley's saloon, crowded, Sunday afternoon, there were no women. There's my grandfather, as small as he was, and his father, as large as he was, sitting down at a table with Tom Foley, some of the other party regulars, and they'd sit around and talk about local 4th District politics.
Here was another measure of Al's father. He could sit down with Foley. Big Tom, as they called him, and not just for his blacksmith bulk. Foley was a proprietor, a solid man, and the district's Tammany boss. A wheel in the biggest engine of power that the Irish of New York knew.
In the 1880s and 90s, we are in the golden years of Tammany Hall. Gold in more ways than one, I might add. The machine was organized very much like the Catholic Church, with the boss as the Pope, and then the district leaders were the bishops, and then the precinct leaders were the parish priests who were tending to the faithful.
Tammany was a creature of its times. A machine, they called it, awesome and modern. But it still conducted business face to face and within the neighborhood. Jobs, contracts, money you gave out to family and friends. That was the first rule. Take care of your own. The Bahoys were simply functionaries in the vast Democratic Party, but in the neighborhood they were stars, with their swell coats and derby hats. If your power stretched just a block and a half, still a Tammany man was someone to be.
The precinct captains were the one who had the closest connection with the people. And he was from the neighborhood. They knew him, they knew where he came from in Ireland or where his parents came from in Ireland. They knew his background. They had grown up with him. He was one of us.
He knew everybody by name, by first name. He knew their foibles. He knew everything about them. And if Patty McSweeney was thrown in jail for being drunk, well, he knew that Patty had a tendency, a weakness, as they called it, you know, or another way they described it, just one fault. He was a fine man, but he just had one fault. He might slip the cop $5 and get Patty out of jail. Patty would come home and swear he would never take another drop. He was circulating through the ward all the time. If there was a wedding, he always showed up at that. And he never missed a funeral.
They'd be sitting in consoling the widow or the children. And all of a sudden, when the doorbell rang and the door opened up and there he was, there was the local representative, it was like, stop everything. Everything went to a hush. Here he comes, he's here. And he'd go in and pay his respects to the corpse, and then he'd leave. Wouldn't stay too long. Just the fact that he was there was enough for the family. And that's sort of, there was an an element of pride that he came to my father's wake. That meant something.
So come with me, and I will treat you decent. I'll sit you down, and I will fill your can. And along the street, all the friends I meet say, there goes Muldoon, he's a solid man. I control the tunes, I control the island. My constituents, they all go there.
And they'd ask every single person in this district, remember Mary Moran, what we did for you when you ran out of coal last winter? And Mary Moran would tell John, her husband, John, get out there and vote. Vote the straight ticket.
These ward healers weren't about social policy or the fate of nations. In this village, Washington was 1,000,000 miles away, a place you'd hear about from newspapers, if at all. By age 12, Al Smith was a newsboy, shouting out the headlines to his neighbors. Grover Cleveland takes over the White House. Geronimo surrenders. And the great John L. Sullivan shakes hands with the Prince of Wales. The papers yielded Al a half-cent each. Most of his earnings he carried home, though sometimes he'd hold back a nickel for the vaudeville show. That was the people's entertainment, and like politics, an Irish growth industry. The stars Al watched on stage had come from the same tenements he knew.
Maggie Klein was a shoe factory foreman's daughter who ran away from home to join the theater. Up in the cheap seats are the newsboys who were most devoted fans. She swaggers onto the stage and she grabs it like a street fighter, holding a corner against a nasty crowd. And she starts to go into Throwing Down McCluskey, the song about an epic boxing match.
'Twas down at Dan McDavitt's on the corner of the street. There was to be a prize fight and both parties were to meet. To make all the arrangements, make sure everything was right. McCluskey and the Negro were to have a finish fight.
So when she sings Throw Him Down McCluskey, everybody in the house goes, Throw him down McCluskey. They rattle their seats, they pound on the floor, they sing along. The newsboys take their bundles of papers and they slam them down on the floor. So you hear the sound of McCluskey's opponent hitting the canvas.
Vaudeville was magic acts, crooning love songs, and dancing bears. It was the crudest ethnic humor. Italian gigolos, Irish drunks, and Hebrew misers, played by and for the immigrants themselves. But it was American, modern, hard-knuckled, brassy, and fast.
There was these two wonderful Irish guys named Russell. They dressed up as servant women with little short skirts, and they'd start beating each other over the head with brooms. Of course, the audience sang the songs along with the entertainers, and if they didn't like somebody, they booed, and whammo, out would come the hook. It was just a continuous pandemonium.
But soon, there were no nickels to toss into a theater till. Before Al Smith turned 13, his father got sick, too weak to truck his loads. His friend, Tom Foley, got him a job on the Brooklyn Bridge. But a year later, even that was too much. Alfred Sr. emerged from his house only once, on Election Day 1886, when he walked to the polls to vote the straight Democratic ticket, and then collapsed on his way home.
Just before he was 13 years old, Al Smith's father died. And the family was penniless because the father had had an illness. All his savings had been used up to pay for the illness. There was nothing left for this family.
The only thing that permitted the family to bury his father was the help that they got from Tom Foley. And in fact, Tom Foley paid for the burial of his father.
Al Smith's mother's choice was whether she was going to try to keep the family together or ask for charity. In those days, if you asked for charity, the first thing that the state did was take your children away and put them in an institution. Anything was better than that. And Al Smith's sister Mary remembers them coming back from the funeral. Now, Al was not quite 13. Mary was 10 years old. And Mary remembers the mother saying, "I don't know where to turn." And she remembers Al Smith saying, "I'm here. I'll take care of you."
It was very common on the Lower East Side for children to begin work as young as 7, 8 years old, sometimes younger.
My grandfather never knew his father. His mother was left a widow at 24 with 6 children. So she took in laundry to support the family. But as soon as the boys could work, they were newspaper boys in the city. They were boot blacks. They did everything to bring pennies into the family.
No one could count the children on the streets of New York in the 1880s. They'd beg for work, street sweeping, tool cleaning, fetching buckets of beer. Or a gang of Irish kids would fight the Jews for turf, for jobs. They'd sleep on steam grates over the underground press rooms on Park Row and sell papers that came out at dawn. Al Smith was lucky. He had a home, and his mother found work making umbrellas. Still, that wasn't enough. Al had to work the streets, too.
He left school before he had actually finished the 8th grade and started a job as a truck chaser, earning about $3 a week.
He would take messages and delivery orders from the company headquarters and run through these crowded streets of the Lower East Side trying to find the truckers. That wasn't making them enough money, so he went to work at the Fulton Fish Market. What he did was unload these huge, very heavy barrels of fish, roll them up this long ramp into the fish market, unpack the fish, and then go back for another barrel. He started every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he worked till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And he did that 6 days a week.
Of course, he had dreams of something else. At night, he'd make the rounds of Bowery theaters to see if they could use him in a crowd scene. His parish priest, Father Keene, was always after Smith for charity plays. Al was young, but he never forgot a line, and he seemed to grow in front of a crowd.
It was often said by people who knew him that he put the ham in Hamlet, and he moved his way up to getting speaking parts and then taking on leading roles, and he loved it.
When he would be in these plays, they always had him play the villain, and he played it so dramatically that the kids would hiss him as he walked through the streets the next day, and he couldn't stand that because he liked everybody to like him.
Smith bought a scrapbook and carefully pasted in his reviews. He rehearsed at night and played on weekends to warm applause. Still, Monday found him back in the sheds with the fish. He was hefting and hauling for 6 years. Tammany was the clear road up for the Irish, but Al was an entertainer and small, not much good in a fight. The way the Irish climbed at the New York polls was more like gang war. This was the age of Dick Croker. He was the boss of Tammany Hall, the master of Manhattan, but he hadn't got there by his wits alone.
As a boy, Croker lived in a shanty in what is now Central Park, and he became the leader of a gang, the Tunnel Gang.
The gangs were recruited to get out the vote. They would go around from polling place to polling place. It was time for the hospitals. It was breaking of heads. It was assault and battery, broken legs, broken heads, broken noses, and that's how they controlled the vote.
Croker made his name with a brawl at the polls in 1874. One of the opposition toughs got shot, and Croker was charged with murder. He beat the charge in court, but after that, no one took on Dick Croker.
Croker simply took over Tammany Hall. when honest John Kelly died, there was a vacancy, there was a vacuum. And people were arguing, no, who's going to be our leader? Croker just walked in and sat at the desk. And well, who's going to come and take this away from me?
He ruled as he rose, but now the whole city was his turf. For Tammany, politics was business, and Crooker wanted into every business. From Mr. Vanderbilt's railroad to the drayman who picked up dead horses in the 6th Ward.
Let's say a man wanted a job as a policeman. The first thing he'd do would be to see who he knew who knew the district leader. Very often, some money might change hands. In the 1880s, the going price was $300. And then, even after he got a job, everybody on the public payroll had to pay 1 or 2%, and higher jobs had to pay even more to Tammany Hall. And then at election day, all of the district leaders went to Tammany Hall, and they called this Dough Day. And everybody was handed maybe $30, $40, $50, $100,000 to pay voters and to grease the wheels of commerce.
Not all the money went back to the streets. Boss Crooker ended up with a mansion off Fifth Avenue, an upstate farm for his racing ponies. He summered in Europe, rode to Democratic conventions in his private Pullman car. In his heart, Crooker hungered to be a gentleman. What he became instead was a scandal. He met a man he couldn't beat, an uptown preacher named Charles Parkhurst. Parkhurst gave the most famous sermon in New York City history, against the police and Tammany Hall. But he didn't just rail from his Madison Square pulpit. He hired a detective, $6 a night, and toured the streets for evidence. Saloons after hours, brothels, a homosexual bar, and everywhere, policemen looking the other way. The preacher capped his tour with a visit to a French circus, girls unclothed playing leapfrog on the stage. His detective played the frog.
Dr. Parkhurst on the floor, playing leapfrog with the whore. Tarara-bum-de-ay, tarara-bum-de-ay.
Well, naturally, every newspaper in New York, and we had dozens of these, this was sensational stuff. They appointed a committee of the legislature, and they got people to testify, and the descriptions were shocking.
The police weren't just taking bribes. They were collecting profits for the Tammany leaders who had organized the gambling rings, the liquor trade, prostitution. How could decent people live in a city where everything was for sale? Now church folk were joined by good government types, businessmen, all the reading classes and newspapers that served them. Crooker became the national symbol for everything wrong with boss politics, the cities, and all the grabby Irish, stealing their way to power.
My grandfather knew that if you want to get ahead in the 4th Ward, stick around Town Foley, because Foley could give jobs out, and very good ones, too.
For Al Smith, like any East Side boy, corruption wasn't the problem. The problem was reformers, goo-goos, goody-goody Protestants, meddling in one of the few businesses the Irish had. Tammany would run on the slogan, "To hell with reform," and they'd win. Along the way, they picked up a new recruit in the 4th Ward.
Nobody ever said that Al Smith went into politics at the beginning to help his people. Politics, Tammany Hall, was a way out. And what he would do for Tom Foley, he would wait around the saloon and hope that Big Tom, as he was known, would give him a contract. What was a contract? It was a little errand for Tammany Hall. It was going to a police station and letting them know that they were enforcing the parking restrictions too strictly against the big campaign contributor. It was going to a brothel and letting them know that there was going to be a police raid that afternoon, so they should close up. He didn't ask Foley if it was a job he'd rather not do. He did it.
Smith was 22 when Foley found him a paying job, serving jury subpoenas. $15 a week wasn't much more than he'd earned as a laborer. But if he played his cards right, he'd never work with his back again. He liked being known now as Tom Foley's man, as he liked his growing stage fame. He'd gather the neighborhood kids at the saloon and buy them all beer or sarsaparilla. And Smith bought himself a swallowtail coat, and with his new trademark, a cigar clamped in the side of his mouth, he had his picture made. A bit of class, that was the ticket. A man in public life had to show some dignity.
Stage Irishman portrayed the Irishman as a bumbling drunk, illiterate, ignorant, ready to stop anything for a fight or a jar.
He was very childlike and childish, totally erratic, drank a lot, sang very loudly, fought at the drop of the hat, and wept copious tears about his poor old Irish mother.
For all the power that the Irish now held, power was a long way from respect.
Every one of these routines ends in a Donnybrook, with people, in some cases, literally being thrown out of the windows. This was the image that the Irish had in the 1870s and 1880s.
But in theater, as in politics, the Irish were taking over. They were theater owners now, impresarios. The brightest star of the day was Ned Harrigan, who got rid of his old Paddy Act and all the old world plays. He put the Irish Americans on stage and gave them a human face.
If you want for information or in need of merriment, come over with me socially to Murphy's tenement, where he owns a row of houses in the first ward by the dock, where Ireland's represented by the babies on our block. They're the Whalens and the Phalens from sweet Donaghadee. They're sitting on the railing with their children on their knee, all gossiping and talking with their friends all in the flock, singing Little Sally Waters with the babies on our block. It's good morning to you, landlord. Sure now, how are you today? One Patrick Murphy Esquire comes down the alleyway.
One devoted fan was Alfred E. Smith. Even decades later, he could while away a train ride of 2 or 3 hours with the songs of Harrigan's comic hero, Dan Mulligan. Maybe in Mulligan's rise, Smith recognized some of his own. Mulligan was the focus of 10 straight hits as he stumbled up from hapless immigrant to saloon keeper on the Lower East Side to solid man.
Dan Mulligan's a man of the neighborhood. He knows everybody on the street. Everybody knows him. He likes a drink after work. He likes to sit out on the stoop and talk to his neighbors.
Everyone in the audience knew Dan, as they knew themselves. He joked with his friends about the Chinese. He schemed against the German butcher, Lockmuller. He stuffed the ballot box and even jumped in himself to become a New York alderman. Finally, with his wife, Cordelia, hauling him by his new serge suit, he climbed all the way out of the old neighborhood and landed uptown on Madison Ave.
In Mulligan Alley, on his front stoop, Dan Mulligan is completely at home. But you take him up to Madison Avenue after he moves there. You settle him into a fancy dining room in a suit that doesn't quite fit. He's completely out of his element. He doesn't know what to do.
The stage directions tell us that he can't even stand up straight. He can't even walk right, as though he was entered a whole new world. Puts the cuspidor up on the table. No, can't have that. Puts it down on the floor, puts his napkin in the cuspidor.
He takes a drink out of the goldfish bowl. He grabs a loaf of bread. He breaks it across his knee.
He takes the little crumb brush, and the wife, Cordelia, is watching, and the next thing is he just starts combing his thinning hair with it.
That was another of Harrigan's inside jokes. Every Irishman knew it was the women, nurses and teachers now, who knew the world and its finer things. It was the women who spurred their families uptown. For men, respectability didn't come easy. Al Smith knew.
He met a girl, an Irish-American girl, whose family had started out on the Lower East Side, but had done well in the world. Her father was a contractor. They moved up to the Bronx. It's a big social step up to move from the Lower East Side to the Bronx.
The Dunns were really what you'd consider lace curtain Irish. Katie Dunn was a blue-eyed, dark-haired, very svelte young lady, well-dressed, well-educated, well-mannered, and was very different from the other girls in the Fourth Ward. And my grandfather saw this in her. And rather than court the girls down in the Fourth Ward, he decided that this was the kind of person that was going to be his wife someday. But definitely she was what you'd consider uptown, upper-class material.
Katie was pleased to entertain him in the parlor at her piano, singing After the Ball or Say au revoir, but not goodbye. But her family wasn't happy, not at all. They'd given Katie education, French lessons, music, manners, the best. And Al hadn't even gone to the 8th grade. He was D's, Dems, and Does, straight from the New York docks. Now, Al wasn't going to change that. The way he talked was good enough to make a crowd in a theater cheer. And now that Tom Foley put him on the stump to speak, well, Al could give a hell of a speech, whether he knew the candidate or not.
You know, they said of Al Smith, his voice has trumpets in it. And this, even in the heartland, because the Fourth Ward was the heartland of Irish eloquence in America, even in a district of great orators, Al Smith was something very special.
In his 20s, Al Smith could have gone in one of two directions in his life. He could have gone into theater. He had opportunities there. He loved the theater. He could also go into politics. He loved politics, and he had a knack for that as well.
But the stage wasn't respectable, not in the Dunn's view. Al came courting for years before he understood his choice, Katie or his acting. Then he didn't hesitate. She was everything he wanted.
He decides to go into politics because for Al Smith, politics is an honorable profession. And he thinks it's appropriate for a life with a woman that might lift him up out of the world of the Lower East Side and take him to ever wider circles.
Alfred and Katie were married May 6th, 1900, in a ceremony just as upright as the piano in the Dunn's parlor.
When there was a Tammany sweep, the custom of the Fourth Ward was the housewives would go out to their stoops and they would tie to the railings 2 brooms to symbolize the Tammany sweep.
They would build bonfires. The bonfires would be 1 and 2 stories high. To hear my grandfather tell it, he would be, with all the other kids, out stealing everything that they could burn. Vegetable stands would go on the bonfire. They would run into restaurants. They would steal tables. They would steal chairs. And he said it would be so hot, you'd burn just standing next to it.
1 year after Al Smith was married, scandal finally sent boss Croker off to Europe for good. And that was Smith's chance. The new boss at Tammany was Charles Francis Murphy, who brought to politics the new vogue for respectability. He wanted a new breed of candidate. Tom Foley put Al Smith in as Assemblyman, 2nd District. He was popular, after all, hard-working, with a gift of gab that was all around Irish, though Smith could also play on his father's German or Italian roots, if the occasion came up. He didn't need to campaign, but he canvassed block by block and steamrolled his opponent 5-1. In his triumph, he told the Morning Telegram, politics was easier than acting. And as he'd been such a corker on stage, it shouldn't be any trick in Albany to bask in the political limelight.
He's an uneducated young man, very unsophisticated, and now he is in the grand, high-ceiling chamber of the New York State Assembly. He's one of the junior assemblymen, and he's a Tammany man. Tammany assemblyman was supposed to vote the way he was told and do very little else. If he has an opinion, nobody wants to hear it. The first 2 years he's up there, he does not give a single speech, this greatest of speech makers. And every day on his desk are plumped down another pile of the bills, the legislation, that is going to be taken up that day. Now, this is a man who never read very much. He used to say, and I think he wasn't exaggerating much, that in his whole life he only read one book cover to cover, The Life of John L. Sullivan. And of course, legislation is very arcane. It's filled with paragraphs and subparagraphs and clauses and modifying clauses. Al Smith didn't understand what these things, anything in them, and he's totally lost.
In Albany, there was a strip of bars and bawdy houses called the Gut. That's where Tammany assemblymen spent their evenings. Of course, Smith went along.
But when he left the saloon, he would go back to his very cheap room. In the boarding house was a rickety desk, and on that desk would be piled the stack of bills that had been on his desk in the assembly chamber that day, and he would start reading them. He would start at the top and read his way through. He would read about a bill authorizing some dam in a little upstate district. He would read about some highway construction project upstate somewhere. He could hear the singing and the raucous voices as the other assemblymen made their way home. But he would sit there still reading the bill. And one of his windows faced the Capitol, and he could see the lights go out one by one. He still read.
My grandfather realized that nothing in the Fourth Ward ever prepared him for this task. It overwhelmed him. And it wasn't long before he missed Katie and his kids and really wanted to go back home again.
New York was where the Irish could be comfortable. After 2 sessions, Smith couldn't think of anything he'd gotten done in Albany. He was still seated in the back row. He had a big family now, and still no money. He went to Tom Foley and said he couldn't make it. Bring me home. The next day at breakfast, Foley made him an offer. I can make you the city building superintendent. And without another word, Smith knew he'd never have money worries again.
Foley looks at him and he says, now, you can have that job if you want it. It's yours. But if you take it, you'll never be a really big man. I think you can be a big man. And in a week, Al Smith comes to Tom Foley and says, I want to go back.
Smith wanted that more than money, to be a big man. His first committee assignments weren't promising: banking and forestry. Alas, he'd only been in a bank once, to serve a jury notice. Forests, he'd never been in one. But Smith was learning his trade. Every week for years, he'd host a dinner: corned beef, cabbage, and beer for 3 or 4 assembly friends, upstaters, or even Republicans. At Keeler's restaurant, Smith would hold court with stories of the tenement life, jokes, skits, songs. And late at night, now he knew what to read. The budget. Hundreds of pages, thousands of line items. No one read it all, except Al Smith.
Now, Silent Charlie Murphy starts to hear about Al Smith, and he asks to meet him. And they have a long conversation with Murphy's people sitting on one side. And at the end, one of them comes over to Murphy and says, "That's a bright young man. He's got a lot of ability. It's too bad he's not a college man." And Murphy says, if he was a college man, he wouldn't be Al Smith. And Murphy starts to push Smith up the ladder.
After 8 years, Smith's committee was Ways and Means. Al had his hands on the money bills. And from New York, 14th Street headquarters, Tammany had more and more jobs for him. "We don't like that new business tax. Kill it. We need some upstate votes against that patronage reform." Whatever the machine needed, Al Smith worked to get it done. His name was back in the newspapers, too. They called him the henchman of Tammany Hall.
March 25th, 1911, it's 4:30 in the afternoon. Someone walking by Washington Square Park saw smoke coming out of the Ash Building. They then saw what looked like a bundle of clothing being thrown out the window. And then, in this moment of horror, people realized that it was actually a young girl who was jumping out of the window of the Ash Building to escape the fire. Smoke was coming off her body. And very quickly, one after the other of these young girls started jumping out of the windows. Someone flicked a cigarette, and it caught on one of those piles of highly flammable fabric, and it started to burn very, very quickly. One young man went to pick up the fire hose, and the hose was rusted shut. People jammed against the door, and as they passed out from smoke inhalation, their bodies piled against the door, and those who were behind them were unable to get out the door. Some tried to go on the fire escapes. I think something like 30 young women died when one of those fire escapes collapsed. Al Smith was stunned to hear of the fire. Many of those who were killed were his constituents.
In this crisis, politicians couldn't get by with personal visits of condolence, money to help with the burials. Everyone in New York knew the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire killed 146, and those deaths could have been prevented. In Albany, the legislature proposed a panel to investigate. Some of the most distinguished names in the state. Al Smith signed on to that bill and added one name to the commission, his own. The factory commission trips were Smith's higher education. Now he was traveling with blue bloods, bankers, labor leaders, professors. For the first time, he could see the smoky Great Lakes steel mills, primitive leatherworks in the Adirondacks, canneries where farm children worked all the daylight up to their hips and waist.
Smith was really quite horrified. I think, like many people who came from the city, he couldn't imagine that it was possible the conditions for workers in rural areas were actually even worse than they were in the city.
They were in some upstate factory, and they wanted to see the children under the age of 7 where they worked. And the owner of the factory said, "No, I have no children under the age of 7. And then they discovered that he's loaded all the children into an elevator and put the elevator between floors so they wouldn't see them. And the people on this commission watched Al Smith. They watch his face when he sees this elevator full of children. Remember, it's Al Smith who as a boy had to work so hard himself to keep his family together.
Smith's own hard experience gave him authority that other commissioners couldn't match. On this terrain, he'd found a place where he could loom large in politics. And as the investigation entered its second year, there was another reason they all turned to him. In Albany, the Democrats had taken over, and Smith was on his way to Speaker of the House. If laws and lives were going to change, someone had to command the votes. Now reformers brought their ideas to Smith, and he brought the ideas to 14th Street, Mr. Murphy.
Murphy was very sober, quiet. He never talked. As a matter of fact, his conversation consisted of three things: yes, no, or I'll look into it. And he used to have lunch at Delmonico's each day in a private room, and I like this touch. He ate at a table with 4 tiger's head claws. He just wanted to remind you that you were talking to the head of Tammany Hall.
The sachems of Tammany would meet at Delmonico's, with Mr. Murphy at the head of the long table. There were platters heaped with oysters, beer, cigar smoke, spittoons. But younger men were talking now. Mr. Murphy, of course, just listened. There was Al Smith with his reformers' ideas, a state fund to pay men hurt on the job, shorter hours for women and children. All the old sachems heard were goo-goo trumpets. Reformers' big ideas came to nothing. But Murphy heard different. He heard votes.
And he looked down the table at the young man and he gave him the go-ahead to sponsor the social welfare legislation that he wanted.
There's a tremendous bond between Al Smith and Charlie Murphy. Charlie Murphy is not a saint by any means. He makes a fortune in politics, but he also knows that if Tammany is going to survive, it has to help people's lives improve in material ways, or else it's just going to become a dinosaur.
With Murphy's power behind him, Smith was a legislative weapon, braying orders, gaveling down the opposition, always moving bills. He'd eat at the rostrum and shout out the vote, with food still in his mouth. When Republicans tried to exempt canneries from a bill requiring 1 day of rest, Smith marched to the lectern. I have read carefully the commandment, "Thou shalt observe the Sabbath day." Nowhere did I see the words, "except in canneries." Then he sat down. The debate was over. With the same skill he once used to block reform, Smith now bent the legislature to his new agenda. He rammed through 36 laws for the Factory Commission. He would provide the new model for the American workplace. People knew who Al Smith was now.
Here was a man who was loyal to Tammany Hall, who was totally regular. Yet, here was a man that the Citizens Union, who had once given him the lowest rating, was now giving a very high rating. Here was a man who was getting favorable editorials in the New York Herald. And Silent Charlie Murphy understood that perhaps this young man would be the instrument that would change the image of the Irish in America.
They would slap each other with these sticks, and they'd use the exaggerated brogue, oh, Maggie, Maggie, and they might find a bottle of liquor in the master's cabinet, and they'd sneak a little bit of it, and then they'd get tipsy, and they'd start lifting up their skirts and dancing. They were doing it as a joke, but a lot of the people who saw it didn't see anything funny in it at all. Especially, I can tell you, my family didn't, because my grandmother was a domestic servant, and she was nothing like that.
On the vaudeville stage for 30 years, John and Jimmy Russell had been cheered and well paid as slap-happy Irish servant girls. But in this new century, the Irish were living different lives, and their image had to be different too. Wages for Irishmen were now equal to all other whites in America. And with literacy levels of 95%, no one could call the Irish dumb immigrants anymore. Not even the Irish themselves.
They want images out there that are going to acknowledge the fact that they are now teachers and nurses and politicians and policemen and judges.
In 1907, the sons and grandsons of the Irish domestics gathered 300 strong and packed a Russell Brothers show. When the curtain came up on the men in drag, they were pelted with eggs, potatoes, and rocks. John and Jimmy Russell were stunned.
They didn't understand that the audience wasn't there for them anymore. And there were boos and catcalls, and the audience told them, no uncertain terms, that it's over. It's not funny anymore.
John and Jimmy Russell left New York, ruined. This wasn't about individuals, a couple of jobs for the boys. There were bigger issues at stake. That's what Mr. Murphy was showing at Tammany Hall when he cut off the old Muldoons and their old ways. Murphy decreed there'd be no more police graft, no prostitution, no gambling, no vice. He didn't care how much it brought in. Of course there was grumbling, even revolts, but Murphy wouldn't bend. Now he was after a prize he couldn't get with Irish votes alone. He needed every nationality, every worker, all the poor. He meant to build a great movement, and the face of that movement would be Al Smith.
In 1915, he had him nominated for sheriff of New York City. Smith won, of course. In 1917, Charlie Murphy had Alfred E. Smith nominated as president of the Board of Aldermen for the city of New York, and of course, Al Smith won. And in 1918, Silent Charlie Murphy wrested from the hands of the upstate Democratic leaders the nomination for governor, and he gave the nomination for governor to Alfred E. Smith. All that day and evening, trains were coming up from New York, long special trains filled with the people from the old neighborhood, filled with the people from the Fourth Ward. They spent the night drinking, celebrating.
Boys and girls together.
Me and Mamie O'Rourke, tripping the light, fantastic, on the sidewalks of New York. It was the sidewalks of New York that Al Smith had just brought to the governor's mansion. He was up from city streets, and his inauguration was the triumph of the Irish in America. It was the complete integration of the Irish, not just as a political power, but as a force for political progress in America. Charlie Murphy summons Smith to his country estate, and Murphy says to Smith, Tammany is going to be asking you for a lot of favors, but if we ever ask you for something that you think is going to keep you from being a good governor, tell me, and the request will be withdrawn. Tammany freed Smith from the demands of the organization. He wanted him to prove that an Irishman could be a great governor.
Smith went at the job like a dock worker, saying what he meant and using muscle when something got stuck. He decorated his office with 2 large spittoons. He moved 5 kids into the mansion, along with a menagerie of dogs, cats, rabbits, and then chimps and a giraffe. But the feature of his administration that drew the most comment was his inner circle. The Republican, Robert Moses, the blue blood reformer, Francis Perkins, and his #1 advisor, Mrs. Moskowitz. He'd spotted her in the campaign, a goo-goo who'd advise him from the shadows. They'd be inseparable for 15 years.
I think my grandmother and Al Smith were an odd couple. She was Jewish. She came out of the progressive era social reform. The Tammany guys didn't know quite what to make of her. They didn't understand the perspective that she was bringing into Al Smith's government. They were probably rather threatened by her.
If you picture in your mind, what is a scene at a typical Tammany strategy session, right? This is a bunch of large, I have to say, they all seem to be red-faced, large, red-faced men, many with big mustaches, a lot of them with gold-capped teeth. A lot of them with big cigars, and a lot of beer was being drunk. And in a corner now is Belle Moskowitz, always knitting, not looking up, just knitting.
And after he heard all the expletives and all the ideas were flung around and so forth, he'd turn to her and say, "What do you think, Mrs. M?" And she'd tell him what she thought, and 9 times out of 10, Al would say, "I agree with her."
Now, they hated that. They hated that she was Jewish. They hated that she was a woman. Another Jewish advisor of his was Joseph Proskauer, who they called Prosky. They called her Mosky. And they had this ditty which they sang. It was an ironic, angry ditty. Prosky and Mosky are the new brains of Tammany Hall.
Smith and his brain trust were creating a new sort of politics. It wasn't Irish, Jewish, or tribal in any regard. It was based on the conviction that all the immigrants, in fact all working people, would rise together, and with government's help. In 4 terms as governor, Al Smith would pour 1 billion yards of concrete, erect 1 million tons of steel. But he would also change the focus of government, with rent controls, subsidized housing and hospital care, limits on the price of power, heat, telephones. There would be a 10-fold pay hike for teachers, and equal pay for women teachers. No one ever ruled Albany as he did. Still, from time to time, Smith would jump a train and go back to the old neighborhood, to walk across the Great Bridge and see his mother in Brooklyn Heights, or to join the boys from the Harrigan Club, singing songs from the Dan Mulligan plays, while a steamship carried them out to Jersey for the annual clam bake. And Smith would take in the new plays, too. By the 1920s, when Al Smith had taken over the governor's chair, George M. Cohan had taken over Broadway. 10 productions in a single year.
I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy, a Yankee Doodle do or die, a real live nephew of my Uncle Sam, born on the 4th of July. I've got a Yankee Doodle sweetheart, she's my Yankee Doodle joy. Yankee Doodle came to London just to ride the pony. I am a Yankee Doodle boy.
It's one of the big transitions in popular entertainment. An Irish American, a son of a group that was deemed un-American, unpatriotic in the middle of the 19th century, is suddenly defining for all Americans what it means to be an American.
His girl is a Yankee Doodle joy. He is a Yankee Doodle boy, born on the 4th of July. Now, how American can you get?
The New York dandy was high style, high hat, snap brim, gray spats. And the best dressed of all was Bo James, a Tin Pan Alley songwriter turned politician, and did pretty well. He was the gaudiest ornament of the Irish Golden Age. His honor, James J. Walker.
He was a fun mayor. He epitomized the ne'er-do-well of New York City. He was a household name. You could see him in the newsreels. He had like 150 suits. Each suit had 2 pairs of pants and so forth, and he was a legend. Al Smith was Mr. New York State, and Jimmy Walker was Mr. New York City.
Al represented, you might say, the moral side of the Irish, the attempt to clean up Tammany, and Walker represented the wild Irish, the wide open city, the Tammany bosses that said, you know, let the good times roll.
New York was rolling in money and ambition, so much of it Irish. Joe Kennedy brought his bootleg and Hollywood millions to Wall Street, where he made millions more. F. Scott Fitzgerald held court at the Plaza. At Madison Square Garden, the champ, Jack Dempsey, ruled. And when the money rained, all the Irish went wet. Contractors couldn't lay brick fast enough, pave or wire, or lay pipe enough. In time for the Irish city inspector, the Irish photographer from the newspaper. Irish streetcar conductors were riding winners in the market. Some of their brokers were Irish too. Even Al Smith got swept along. When he'd come to town now, he wouldn't go home to Oliver Street. He'd take a couple of suites at the Biltmore. He had new friends, financiers. Reformers whispered that Smith had gone swanky, but the Irish loved him. And Walker, the bad boy, they loved him more.
He was described as part Beau Brummel, part gutter snipe. And Robert Moses describes Jimmy Walker coming into his office, and there's this pile of mail on his desk, and he says, "Any checks in there?" And the secretary says no, and he sweeps all the letters off the desk onto the floor.
And he always had a smile on his face. He was always dancing. He always had a glass of champagne in his hand. He defied all of the canons of respectability and morality.
Now, Mayor Walker wrote another song. And then he gave the music to the police.
New York was America's champagne town, the bubblier for the fact that champagne was illegal. In Jimmy Walker's New York, the rules didn't apply. Anything was for sale. That's what turned Al Smith against him. For Smith, there was more than morality at stake. After Mr. Murphy's death in 1924, Al Smith was himself the boss of New York Democrats. He was the most admired governor in any state, and he meant to build a record that would resound across the country.
For one who has the will to win, who not only deserves success, but commands it. Victory is his habit. The happy warrior, Alfred E. Smith.
In his last years, Mr. Murphy had pushed Tammany power past the borders of New York. In alliance with other big state bosses, making deals with the right-wing Democrats of the South, Murphy laid the foundation for the third great Irish institution in the New World. First, the church in America, then the labor movement, now the new Democratic Party. Southerners, workers, and immigrants. Together, they would dominate U.S. politics through most of the century.
On the steps of this Capitol, where 25 years ago I first came into the service of the state, I accept my party's summons. Within this building, I learn the principles, the functions, and the purposes of government, and to know that the greatest privilege that can come to any man is to give himself to a nation which has reared him and raised him from obscurity to be a contender for the highest office in the gift of the people.
When Al Smith was nominated, a wave of enormous pride swept through the Irish-American community.
It was almost like a euphoria in Lower Manhattan. They couldn't believe it, that he would have the nerve to do such a thing. It was one thing to acquire a certain amount of political power in your own Irish neighborhood in the Lower East Side. When Al Smith went to Albany, it was like, my God, we're almost at the top of the mountain. Now we were going to show the rest of the nation what one of our guys could do.
East side, west side, all through the USA they're saying, he's our Al. Mothers dream of having a son like him, without a shame, staining his name. Men are proud to be allowed to know and to call him pal. East side, west side, all through the USA they're saying, he's our Al.
Al Smith had never seen the vast territory he meant to govern, and he was fighting a wave of Republican prosperity. But he was just as cocky as he'd been on his way to Albany a quarter century before. He'd proven he was a corker at this game. So what if the experts said he had no chance? Smith had his drama to sell. his boyhood in the tenements, his rise through hard times. It was the log cabin story for the modern age. The way Smith saw it, the immigrants and their children hadn't just become Americans. Now they were America, what America was bound to become.
Hear those drums, that means here he comes. All together, give a cheer, let's go, Al's here. East side, west side, all
The most exciting thing, of course, when I was in the 8th grade and during the Al Smith campaign, was that Daddy came home and told us at dinner time that the Smith campaign train was going to go through our town. So on a big day, we put on our Girl Scout uniforms, and there were big crowds of people, a lot of men in overalls and that kind of thing. But I was a little bit embarrassed by him, which I never confessed to my father, because he was so very New York. He didn't seem quite, well, that's an awful word to use, but refined to me, quite cultivated. And he was so alien to that Minnesota landscape.
The organ would begin to play the sidewalks of New York, and out would come Al Smith, waving his brown derby, cigar in hand, smiling a beaming smile at the crowd, with his rolling walk, partly a strut, partly a roll. He would make a performer's entrance to the stage. Thanks a lot for the audience. Thanks for the appreciation. That was Al Smith in the Heartland. But of course, the Heartland was not New York.
Like Smith, Herbert Hoover knew the country was going urban. But Hoover also knew the fear that inspired in small-town folk. That's why he was so busy reminiscing about the old Iowa farm, where he'd while away the afternoons near the old swimming hole. Smith had had his background used against him before, and always came out on top. "Yes, sir, I'm a graduate of FFM," he'd announce with a vaudevillian wink. The Fulton Fish Market.
Here's a hat that's well known in New York City on all of its sidewalks, east side, west side, all around the town and the adjacent territory. Now, if you'll remove that more becoming hat, I'll put this one on. And what goes with it?
He wasn't going to be an imitation wasp, which some people, were urging the Irish to become. Instead, he said, "I am what I am, and take me or leave me. I'm an American and I'm an Irishman, and the two are not in conflict." Jim Fawley told me this story. Fawley was one of Smith's campaign managers, and he came to Smith and he said, "Al, look at the list of people on this train. There isn't anything but Irish names. We got to do something about this. We're going out to see everybody else in this country." So Smith said, "Oh, Jim, you're right. I'll take care of that." So a week later, Fawley gets a new list. He looks at it, and it's all Irish names again. So he goes back to Smith and says, "I thought you were going to change this list." He says, "Oh, I did. Look, 7 of these guys are Protestants."
Smith's insularity told in his policies. He'd never studied tariffs, so he asked a couple of businessmen and came out with a high tariff policy that could have been Hoover's. He even asked his business friends about immigration, and then recommended that America move to close her doors to the world. His positions didn't make sense with who he was. Maybe that didn't matter. He was Catholic, wasn't he? People knew what that stood for.
There were a lot of rumors about Smith, that he was involved in political corruption in league with the saloon keepers, and that he had his hand out for bribes and things like that.
And he was portrayed as the personification of big city evil.
Someone who was Tammany Hall, wringing wet, and a Roman Catholic.
We had a Protestant minister. He would get up in the pulpit on Sunday morning and rail against the Pope and tell us all, particularly the young people, that if Al Smith, a Catholic, were to be elected, that the Pope would be over on the next boat and would take over the government of the United States.
Will Rogers tried to make fun of the issue And he said, folks, the Pope ain't going to move over here if Smith's elected president. He said, I've been over there to the Vatican. He said, it'd take him more than 4 years to move all that stuff.
How could the chief of the United States kneel to kiss the Pope's ring? Even educated Protestants thought a Catholic must have divided loyalty. And the uneducated, they waged their own campaign.
Smith saw the fiery crosses burning in the fields. By 28, the Klan was moribund, on its last legs, but Smith's nomination revived it. And it was clearly the religious issue more than anything else.
One of the places that Governor Smith had to speak was in Oklahoma City. And by the time he arrived, he felt that he was going to face a very hostile audience, and indeed he did.
He met a very cold reception in the streets of Oklahoma City, a sort of deafening silence from the people on the sidewalks and the railway station and so on. So he decided, again against the advice of his counselors, that he would scrap the speech he was going to give and make the main theme the religious issue.
There were about 30,000 people in the hall. They were making a constant noise during the time that he spoke, so that he felt that he could hardly even make himself heard.
His voice sounded angry, defiant, and defensive. He said this shouldn't even be an issue. He said no Catholic should vote for him because of his religion, but anyone who voted against him because of religion wasn't a good American. That didn't go down well.
My grandmother, who was listening to the speech on national radio hookup back in Albany, called the hotel where she knew Al Smith was staying and left a message, "Please call me as soon as you get in," because she was afraid that he was being attacked. There was so much hostility in the air and noise over the radio that she was convinced that his life was in danger.
Smith looked out at the stony faces in the front rows, and the air seemed to come out of him. He could see there was no way to win these crowds out here.
It became clear to Smith, really clear for the first time, that there was nothing he could do, nothing he could say, no proof he could adduce that would convince them that he was fit to be president of the United States. And that was a tragedy for Al Smith. And he knew that there was nothing he could do to change it.
Will Rogers wrote, I'm sending a wire to the Pope. Unpack.
After Al Smith lost, I was very sad, and I was afraid if I went up Main Street, people would meet me and jeer at me and taunt me for Al Smith's having lost. It was a feeling that it was my loss as well as his.
My father told me a story about the day after the defeat. There was a postman who lived on his block, an Irish immigrant, and he came out and he took down the American flag. He brought it into his house and he never flew it again.
It was a crushing blow that left so many people totally confused. But as the Irish Catholics always did, they turned to their church, and the church berated them for seeking earthly goals rather than heavenly goals. You're not supposed to go for the gold here on earth. You're supposed to go for the gold in heaven. And you shouldn't have even gone for that. Shame on you.
For the Irish, Smith's campaign and its failure had brought shame. Another Irish defeat to be nursed in tales for a generation, until a new, fresh champion could lead them to the White House. For Al Smith, there was nowhere to go but home, where his own shame was deepest. While the aristocratic Franklin Roosevelt had swept into office as New York's governor, the man who'd handpicked him ran far behind.
It was devastating for him. He was sort of like Mr. New York. He never forgot it. It sort of gnawed at him for many, many years.
He took it very hard. He was embittered by it for the rest of his life. So were many of his followers. You know, Smith summed it up by saying, I guess the time hasn't come when a man can say his beads, his rosary in the White House. He showed how far the child of immigrants could go in America, and yet he showed how far that they still had to go.
The name is a kind of a secret. Maybe after I start, some of the folks around my own age, you'll know what the song is, but you'll all know the chorus. Now, are you ready, Professor? Yes. Oh, the night that I struck New York, I went out for a quiet walk. People that saw me, they all would say, it's better by far you'd go down Broadway. But there was the Bowery ablaze with lights. I was out for to see the sights. I had one of the devil's own nights, and I'd never go there anymore.
Al Smith was 55 years old, the prime of life for a public man. He'd risen in his fortunes as he never could have dreamed. Home was now an apartment on Fifth Avenue. His neighbors were Rockefellers, Vanderbilts. Smith's business friends were planning a building of 102 stories, the marvel of the age. And they asked Al to head the company with a title that became him, President of the Empire State. He would find the job boring. His love wasn't the building, but the Empire State itself.
Governor Smith, I mean Al. And Mrs. Smith, and Bob Motus, and my friends. This day is notable not so much for the inauguration of a new governor, as that it marks the close of the term of a governor who has been our chief executive for 8 long years.
Mrs. Roosevelt and the delightful family of children, I left as many animals as I could.
Governor Roosevelt won national acclaim with new social welfare laws modeled on Smith's bills from years past. Then he climbed aboard the movement to clean up corruption in New York City. Of course, that meant Tammany.
The star performer in New York's biggest show, Mayor Jimmy Walker, is getting a noisy reception as he arrives for his act.
After the Depression hit, the Irish Golden Age looked tawdry in the hard new light. Investigation and indictment were the new growth industries. Like Boss Croker 30 years before, Jimmy Walker hied himself to the steamship pier and fled to Europe in disgrace. The Irish Pauls were out of City Hall, out of American esteem, on the sidelines through the New Deal. They were, you know, Muldoons, fine for packing the polls, but you wouldn't want them in charge.
When Roosevelt wins the presidency, Smith expected that Roosevelt would bring him into his administration, particularly since, as Roosevelt said, practically everything we've done in the New Deal, Al Smith did first in New York. And he put out tenders to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt made it very clear that he was never going to give Al Smith a job.
No man was ever given greater power by Congress. And look at what we got.
When Smith turned against Roosevelt, Republicans gleefully put him on display. Here was Al Smith on the stump, attacking the Democratic Party in which he'd spent his life, slamming his own hand-picked successor, railing against the very ideas that he'd brought forth a decade before.
My grandmother saw in him increasing paranoia, increasing drinking, increasing irascibility.
He was cast adrift, he became more bitter, and the rich took him in, and he became an exile.
The story of the last years of Al Smith's life, the life of the happy warrior of the political battlefield, are really a story of great sadness. Smith would sit afternoon with nothing to do, this man of incredible vitality and energy. And he'd be sitting in a big easy chair, looking out the window, looking west across Central Park. There'd usually be a big drink in his hand.
My grandfather was living right across from Central Park Zoo, and he would often take us over there and visit the animal cages.
When Robert Moses, his protege, became park commissioner, he built this beautiful zoo and decided to make of it a present to this man that he loved, really, above all other men, Al Smith. He is awarded this medal, which makes him Knight Superintendent of the Central Park Zoo. Every night, he would go over to the zoo. The doormen at his building and the adjoining buildings got quite used to seeing at 11:30 or midnight this paunchy figure in the brown derby, big cigar sticking out of his mouth, walking across to the zoo, down the steps, and vanishing among the cages.
Have you ever been in love, me boys, or have you felt the pain? I'd sooner be in jail myself than be in love again. For the girl I loved was beautiful, I'd have you all to know. And I met her in the garden where the praties grow. She was just the sort of creature, boys, that nature did intend to walk right through the world, me boys, without the Grecian bend. Nor did she wear a chignon, I'd have you all to know. And I met her in the garden where the praties grow. Says I, me pretty Kathleen, I'm tired of single life, and if you've no objection, sure I'll make you my sweet wife. She answered me right modestly and curtsied very low. You're welcome to the garden where the praties grow. She was just the sort of creature, boys, that nature did intend to walk right through the world, me boys, without the Grecian bend. Nor did she wear a chignon, I'd have you all to know. And I met her in the garden where the praties grow. Says I, me pretty Kathleen, I hope that you'll agree. She wasn't like your city girls that say you're making free. She says, I'll ask me parents and tomorrow I'll let you know if you'll meet me in the garden where the praties grow. She was just the sort of creature, boys, that nature did intend to walk right through the world, me boys, without the Grecian bend. Nor did she wear a chignon, I'd have you all to know. And I met her in the garden garden where the praties grow. Oh, the parents, they consented, and we're blessed with children 3. 2 boys just like their mother, and the girl's the image of me. And now we're going to train them up the way they ought to go, for to dig in the garden where the praties grow. She was just the sort of creature, boys, that nature did intend to walk right through the world, me boys, without the Grecian bend. Nor did she wear a sheeny on, I'd have you all to know. And I met her in the garden where the praties grow.
Major funding for this program was provided by Jefferson Smurfit Corporation. Around the world, we're known for our paper, paperboard and packaging products, and paper recycling. We are proud of our Irish heritage through our association with Jefferson Smurfit Group.
Funding for this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
This is PBS.